I never imagined Christmas could feel this lonely, Jack Carter muttered to himself as he stared out the window, watching the snowflakes gently fall outside his penthouse. The city below was a blur of lights and movement, but all he could feel was emptiness. It had been a long time since he'd truly felt alive. His fortune, his success, none of it mattered anymore. The holidays were supposed to be filled with warmth, love, and family. But this year, everything seemed to have slipped through his fingers. His last relationship had ended in a mess of lies and broken promises, and now, here he was, alone. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through the names in his contacts, but none of them offered a real solution. His mind wandered to the idea of escaping this loneliness, even if just for a moment. That's when the thought hit him. What if he could just pretend? What if he could find someone to spend Christmas with, just to break the silence? Someone who wouldn't expect anything, someone who wouldn't judge him for his mistakes. That's when he remembered her. Emily Watson, the town's most rejected woman, the one who had never seemed to belong anywhere, and yet somehow, she was always there. Jack didn't know why the thought of her came to mind. Maybe it was the fact that she, too, had always been on the outside looking in. Maybe it was the pity he had for her, or maybe it was something else, something deeper that he wasn't ready to admit. She had always been there, just waiting for an opportunity to prove herself. Jack didn't think much of it at first. He texted her, inviting her to dinner, offering her a chance to escape her own loneliness for one evening. It was a simple offer, no expectations, just two people who had nothing else to do on Christmas Eve. When she replied, the hesitation was clear in her message, but she accepted. "I'll be there." Emily arrived at his penthouse, dressed modestly, but there was something about her that made her stand out. She wasn't like the women Jack was used to. She wasn't looking for something from him. There was no pretension, no agenda, just a quiet strength about her. The evening was awkward at first, filled with polite conversation and the sound of clinking glasses. Jack couldn't quite figure out why he felt drawn to her, why her presence seemed to make him feel lighter, somehow. They talked about life, about the simple things, things that Jack had long forgotten to care about. As the night wore on, Jack found himself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in a long time. He didn't feel like the billionaire CEO anymore, didn't feel the weight of expectations that came with his title. He just felt like a man, sitting across from another human being who understood loneliness all too well. As the night drew to a close, Jack found himself offering Emily a ride home. She accepted, and as they drove through the empty streets, the glow of the Christmas lights reflecting off the snow, Jack realized something he hadn't expected. He didn't want the night to end. There was something about Emily, something real, something he couldn't ignore. But just as he was starting to understand the pull he felt toward her, the truth was about to come to light. The truth that would change everything, not just for him, but for both of them. He had no idea how deeply his life would soon be altered, or how much Emily's presence would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about love and about himself. As the days passed, Jack found himself unable to shake the memory of that night. It had been unexpected, the way Emily had made him feel. He thought he had invited her to escape the loneliness of Christmas, but somewhere between the awkward small talk and the comfortable silence, something had shifted. He couldn't remember the last time he had enjoyed someone's company so much. Emily wasn't like the women he was used to. There was no pretension, no calculation. She was genuine, and in her presence, he felt like he could breathe again. But as the days wore on, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the inevitable truth that had to come out. The truth he was afraid to face. It wasn't just the simple fact that Emily was carrying his child. It was everything that came with it. Jack's mind raced, trying to process how everything had changed so quickly. One moment, he was the successful, untouchable billionaire CEO. The next, he was facing a future he had never imagined. A future that involved a woman he hardly knew, and a baby he had never planned for. His phone buzzed one morning, the sound of an incoming message pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was Emily. "We need to talk," her message read. His heart sank. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure he was ready for it. After all, how could he explain to her that he didn't know what to do, that he hadn't planned on any of this? He picked up the phone and quickly typed a reply. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. The words felt heavy on the screen, like they were dragging him towards something inevitable. Jack arrived at Emily's apartment, his mind racing with thoughts of what to say. He knocked gently on her door, and when she opened it, the sight of her took him by surprise. She was dressed simply, but the calmness in her eyes gave nothing away. There was no anger, no accusation, just a quiet strength that made Jack feel even more uncertain of himself. "Come in," Emily said softly, stepping aside. He entered, his eyes scanning the modest apartment. It was far different from the luxurious penthouse he called home, yet there was something comforting about it. They sat down across from each other, the silence between them stretching out longer than either of them anticipated. Finally, Jack spoke. "I know things have changed," he said, his voice steady but filled with tension. "But I want to make this right. I don't know how, but I want to try." Emily looked at him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face as if trying to decide if his words were genuine. "Jack, I don't need you to try," she said quietly. "I need you to understand that this isn't just about you. It's about what's coming next. It's about our future and our child." Her words hit Jack harder than he expected. He had been so focused on the shock of the situation that he hadn't considered the full scope of it, the responsibility, the choices, the future he would now have to build from scratch. Emily's calmness didn't make the conversation any easier. In fact, it only made him more aware of how little he truly understood. "I'm scared," Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be a father, or how to give you what you deserve." Emily's expression softened, and she reached out, her hand resting on his. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," she said. "But we're in this together. We have to figure it out, step by step." Jack felt a weight lift off his chest, just a little. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. They both sat in the quiet of the apartment for a while, allowing the silence to fill the space between them. Jack's thoughts drifted, unsure of where they would go from here. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected twist in his life wasn't the end. It could be a new beginning. He looked at Emily, seeing her not as the woman he had thought he was rescuing from loneliness, but as someone who had her own strength, her own story. And maybe, just maybe, their stories were meant to intertwine. "Let's take this one day at a time," Jack said, his voice more certain now. "I'm willing to try. For you. For us." Emily nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "That's all I need," she said. Jack could feel the weight of her words, and he knew they both had a long road ahead. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel so alone. As the weeks passed, Jack found himself adjusting to a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around business meetings, boardrooms, or the luxury of his penthouse. Instead, his days were now filled with planning, anticipation, and quiet moments with Emily. They were far from perfect, but they were learning. The mornings started with Emily's soft voice calling out from the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee filling the apartment, and the low hum of the radio playing in the background. Emily was strong, but there was something in the way she handled everything that made Jack realize how much he had taken for granted. Emily wasn't just the woman he had once seen as a temporary escape. She was someone who had been through far more than he could ever understand, and yet, she carried on with such grace. Jack had always prided himself on being in control, but here, in this small apartment with Emily, he found himself confronting the reality of his own vulnerability. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but he knew he wasn't ready to walk away from it. Emily had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary. Every conversation, no matter how mundane, felt like a lesson in patience and understanding. She didn't demand anything from him, didn't ask for anything more than what he was willing to give. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was enough. There were moments when Jack would catch a glimpse of her during the day, her hands delicately holding a cup of tea, her eyes focused on a book, the soft curves of her body moving around the apartment. In those moments, he realized how much he had overlooked before. Emily wasn't just a woman he'd brought into his life for Christmas. She was now part of his world, in ways he hadn't imagined. He had to admit to himself that he was falling in love with her. It wasn't some grand gesture or a whirlwind romance. It was something deeper, something quieter. It was the way she made him feel like he could be his truest self without fear of judgment. And yet, Jack still couldn't shake the fear that had been growing in the back of his mind. He knew the truth had to come out eventually. Emily's pregnancy was not just a twist in their story, it was a turning point. And as much as Jack had tried to embrace it, The reality of fatherhood was starting to feel like a weight he couldn't escape. Emily, however, was more than prepared. She was already planning, thinking ahead, making sure everything would be in place for the baby. Jack didn't know how she did it, but she made it look so effortless. It was as though she was meant for this, meant for everything they were about to face together. But Jack knew he wasn't the same person he was before. He couldn't just go back to his old life. He was a father now, and this baby, this family, was everything. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Emily's hand resting on her growing belly, Jack looked at her and felt a surge of emotions he hadn't expected. "I'm scared," he confessed quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared I won't be good enough." Emily smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to be perfect," she said. "You just have to be here. For me, for the baby." The simplicity of her words struck him. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about showing up, about being present. And for the first time, Jack truly understood what it meant to love someone unconditionally. As the weeks turned into months, Jack's world continued to shift. The business deals, the meetings, the constant pressure, all of it seemed so distant now. What mattered most was the life that was growing inside Emily, the life they were about to bring into this world. And he would be there for every moment, every step. This wasn't just a new chapter for Emily, it was a new chapter for him as well. Jack had never imagined he would be here, sitting in this small apartment, preparing for the arrival of his child. But as he looked at Emily, the woman who had changed everything, he knew there was nowhere else he'd rather be. As the months passed, the day Emily had been waiting for finally arrived. Jack could feel the weight of it all, the growing anticipation, the shift in their lives that was about to happen. Emily's belly had grown, and the baby was coming soon. Jack had spent the last few weeks preparing, though nothing could fully prepare him for what was to come. He had spent so much of his life focused on success, on building his empire, that he had never once thought about the quiet moments, the ones that would define the rest of his life. He had never thought about how it would feel to be a father, to hold his child in his arms. The day started like any other, but Jack knew something was different. There was a calmness in the air, a stillness that he hadn't felt before. As Emily moved around the apartment, getting everything ready, he found himself lost in thought, his mind racing with the magnitude of what they were about to face. The phone rang, cutting through the silence. It was the hospital. "It's time," the voice on the other end said. Jack's heart raced. He looked over at Emily, who was already gathering her things, her face set in determination. She was calm, as if she had done this 100 times before. Jack, on the other hand, felt his world tilt. He hadn't imagined this moment would come so soon. They arrived at the hospital, and Jack could barely contain the whirlwind of emotions inside him. He was nervous, excited, and scared all at once. The hospital room was sterile, but the energy inside it was anything but. There was a sense of anticipation, as if the room itself was waiting for the new life to enter the world. Emily sat on the bed, her hands gripping the edge, her breathing steady. Jack stood by her side, unsure of what to do but determined to be there for her. He held her hand, squeezing it whenever the pain of the contractions hit, offering what little comfort he could. As the hours passed, Jack began to feel the weight of it all. He had never been a part of something so raw, so vulnerable. He had always prided himself on being in control, but here, in this room, he was nothing more than a witness to the miracle of life. The moment the baby was born, Jack was overwhelmed with emotion. It wasn't just the relief of it being over, it was the moment when everything changed. He looked down at the tiny, wriggling baby in Emily's arms, and for the first time in his life, he knew what it meant to be truly responsible for someone else. As Emily cradled their child, Jack felt a sense of awe. He had never imagined that he could love something so completely, so fiercely. This was no longer about him. This was about the future, about the family they were building together. Emily looked up at him, her eyes soft and filled with gratitude. "We did it," she whispered. Jack nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We did." For the first time, Jack realized that he was no longer alone. This was his family now, and nothing could ever change that. The next few days were a blur of newness and adjustment. Jack found himself learning how to care for the baby, how to be a father in ways he had never thought possible. The sleepless nights, the endless feeding, the small moments of joy, it was all part of the process. He had no idea what he was doing, but he knew one thing for sure. He would do anything for his family. As they settled into their new life together, Jack and Emily found themselves growing closer. They had always been connected. But now, with the baby in their lives, they were more than just partners. They were a family, bound together by love and the shared responsibility of raising their child. Jack had never imagined this life, but now that he was living it, he couldn't imagine anything else. It was messy, imperfect, and sometimes overwhelming, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt complete. He wasn't just a billionaire CEO anymore. He was a father. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift he had ever received. The days after the birth of their child passed in a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Jack found himself in a world he never expected, one filled with the quiet moments of fatherhood that were both overwhelming and beautiful. He watched as Emily, with her quiet strength, adapted to motherhood in a way that seemed effortless. She was calm, nurturing, and patient, and Jack marveled at how she balanced everything with grace. He often found himself holding their baby, feeling the weight of the tiny life in his arms, and it was in those moments that the reality of fatherhood truly sank in. He had never known a love like this. The nights were long, filled with cries and soothing lullabies, but Jack didn't mind. Every sleepless hour, every moment spent comforting their child, only brought him closer to the family he never thought he would have. He found himself thinking about everything he had taken for granted before, the boardrooms, the money, the success. None of it mattered now. What mattered was this small, fragile life that depended on him and Emily. One evening, as Emily was making dinner, Jack stood by the window, watching the sunset. He could see the faint glow of the city skyline in the distance, but it felt so far away now. His life had shifted, and he was no longer the man he used to be. He didn't care about the empire he had built. What mattered now was the family he was creating. Emily joined him by the window, her hand resting on his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft, but with a concern that only she could give. Jack nodded, but he couldn't hide the emotions swirling inside him. "I just never thought it would feel like this," he said quietly. "I never thought I would be this happy." Emily smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "You're doing great," she said, her hand brushing his cheek. "We're doing this together." Jack looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. He didn't deserve her, didn't deserve the calmness she brought into his chaotic life. But he was learning, growing, and he was starting to understand the value of the simple things. It wasn't the wealth or the prestige, it was the love they shared, the small moments they created together. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself becoming more involved in every part of their lives. He was there for every late-night feed, every moment of laughter, every cry that needed comforting. The weight of responsibility didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a privilege. He was proud to be a father, proud to be a partner to Emily. His old life felt like a distant memory, a life that no longer had any meaning. He had everything he needed right here, in this apartment, with Emily and their child. And yet, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something more he had to do. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he knew that this new chapter of his life wasn't just about being a father. It was about building a future that would be different from the one he had planned. It wasn't about wealth, success, or accolades. It was about building something real, something that would last. One afternoon, as he sat with Emily on the couch, their baby peacefully sleeping in the crib nearby, Jack took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice filled with a sense of purpose. "I want to make sure we have everything we need. Not just for now, but for the future. I want to be the kind of man who can give you everything you deserve." Emily looked at him, her expression softening. "We already have everything we need," she said. "We have each other." Jack smiled, the weight of her words sinking in. Maybe it wasn't about giving her everything he had. It was about being the man she needed. It was about showing up, every day, for his family. That was the kind of future he wanted to build. A future where love, not wealth, was the foundation. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in his life, he knew he was on the right path. The future was uncertain, but he wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't be facing it alone. Together with Emily and their child, He was ready to build a new life, one filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. As the days turned into months, Jack found himself caught in the balance between his old life and the new one he was building with Emily. The city around him buzzed with the same energy, but he couldn't ignore how different everything felt now. He was no longer the driven businessman who thrived on success and power. Now, his world revolved around the quiet moments he shared with Emily and their child. The moments that once seemed insignificant were now the ones that gave him the most joy. Early mornings spent feeding the baby, late nights talking about dreams and fears. Those were the moments that defined his life now. Jack had never imagined he would feel this way. He had always thought that success was measured by wealth, by the accolades he received, by the empire he built. But now, as he sat in the living room with Emily, watching their baby sleep peacefully, he understood that true success was something else entirely. It was in the way Emily smiled at him when he walked into the room, in the way she trusted him to be a father, in the way their child looked at him with wide eyes, completely dependent on him for love and care. Every day, Jack became more aware of how much he had taken for granted. The love he had been seeking in his career was already here, in the family he was now a part of. It wasn't easy, of course. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when Jack questioned if he was doing enough, if he was enough. Parenthood was no easy task, and the weight of responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming. But every time Emily looked at him with that quiet strength, he found reassurance. She believed in him, and that belief became his anchor. One evening, as Jack walked through the door after a long day at work, he was met by Emily and their child. The baby was in her arms, his tiny hands reaching for him, a soft smile on his face. Jack's heart swelled at the sight. He had been worried about balancing work and family, but in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. "I missed you today," Emily said softly, her voice full of warmth. Jack smiled and kissed her gently. "I missed you too." They settled down on the couch, the baby resting between them. Jack couldn't help but think about how much had changed since that first night they spent together. He had come into this relationship expecting nothing more than a distraction from his loneliness. But now, he couldn't imagine his life without Emily or their child. There was a peace in the air now, a quiet understanding between them that didn't need words. "You know, I've been thinking," Jack said, his voice thoughtful. "I've spent so much of my life building things, but I never thought about what I was really building. I was so focused on success that I missed what really mattered." Emily looked at him, her expression soft and understanding. "What do you mean?" she asked. Jack paused for a moment, looking down at their child. "This," he said finally, "this is what I've been building all along. A family, a future, something real." Emily smiled, her hand resting on his. "I think we've built something beautiful." Jack nodded, his heart full. The days ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was ready for them. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He would always show up for his family. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it with Emily by his side. Together, they had already built a life that was more meaningful than anything Jack had ever imagined. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly fulfilled. As they sat together, the weight of the world seemed lighter, the future brighter. They had created something beautiful, something that would last. Jack knew that no matter what came their way, they would face it together as a family. And that, he realized, was all that mattered. As the seasons changed, so did Jack's perspective on life. The overwhelming feeling of responsibility had transformed into something quieter, peace. His days were now filled with the laughter of their child, the constant hum of daily life, and the warmth of Emily's presence. The noise of his past life, the boardrooms, the endless meetings, and the pressure to succeed had faded into the background. Now, all that mattered was the little moments, holding his child in the morning, sharing a quiet dinner with Emily, and watching the sunset together as a family. Jack had never thought of himself as someone who could just be with someone. He had always been focused on achieving, on building something that could stand the test of time. But now, he understood what it meant to build something of true value. It wasn't the empire he had spent so many years creating. It was this, the life he was living with Emily and their child. It was these small moments of connection, these little exchanges of love and understanding, that made life feel complete. There were still challenges, of course. Parenthood was no easy task, and the responsibilities kept growing. There were sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant worry that they might not be doing enough. But in the midst of it all, there was joy. Every time Jack looked at Emily, he saw the woman who had given him a new purpose. She wasn't just the mother of his child. She was his partner, his equal, and the person who had helped him see that love was more important than success. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, the baby resting in Emily's arms, Jack found himself thinking about the future. The baby had changed everything. In ways he couldn't explain, Jack felt like a different person. He wasn't just the businessman or the man with power. He was a father. And in that role, he had found something far more meaningful than anything he had ever achieved before. Emily looked at him, her eyes full of the same quiet strength that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack turned his gaze to the horizon, watching the sun dip below the trees. "I do," he said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I think about what kind of future we want for our child, what kind of world we want to create for them." Emily smiled, a small, knowing smile that made Jack's heart swell. "I think we're already creating it," she said. "One day at a time." Jack nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle in his chest. They didn't need to have it all figured out. They didn't need to have every answer to every question. What mattered was that they were in this together, building a future from love, not fear. As the days went on, Jack found himself more and more immersed in this new life. He spent less time on the phone with clients and more time holding his child. He was present in a way he had never been before. And as he watched Emily care for their child, he realized that he was watching the woman who had made him see that there was so much more to life than what he had once believed. She was not just the woman he had chosen to share his life with. She was the one who had shown him what it truly meant to live. Emily was the foundation, the steady presence in their home, and Jack realized how lucky he was to have her by his side. There were moments when Jack felt overwhelmed by the weight of fatherhood, the pressure of providing and protecting. But then he would look at Emily, at the child they were raising together, and he would know that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. They had created something beautiful, something real. And as he held their child in his arms that night, he made a silent promise to himself that he would never take any of it for granted. This was his life now, and he wouldn't change a thing. As the months passed, Jack continued to find himself adjusting to this new life, the one he never thought he would lead. The days were longer now, not in terms of time, but in significance. Each moment with Emily and their child felt like a small treasure, one that Jack knew he could never take for granted. He still had his business, but it no longer defined him. The boardrooms and corporate meetings were distant memories, and Jack realized that he had never been truly present in his own life until now. His new role as a father had shown him a side of himself that he had never known existed. He wasn't just a man with wealth and power anymore. He was someone who woke up every morning with a purpose. Someone who had to be there for his family in ways he had never imagined. Emily had been the rock that held everything together, and Jack couldn't help but admire her strength. She was everything he wasn't: calm, collected, and completely selfless when it came to their child. The way she cared for their baby with such ease left Jack in awe. At first, he had doubted his ability to be a father. How could someone like him, who had spent his life focused on career and success, suddenly become the person his child needed? But Emily had never doubted him, and slowly, he began to believe that he could do this. Every night when he held their child, Jack could feel the weight of fatherhood, but it wasn't a burden, it was a gift. He never thought he would feel this way, but with each passing day, he felt more and more connected to the tiny life he had helped bring into the world. The love he felt for their child was like nothing he had ever experienced before. One evening, after putting the baby to sleep, Jack and Emily sat together on the couch. The house was quiet, the kind of peace that Jack had longed for but never knew how to find. Emily looked at him, her eyes soft, but filled with something deeper. "You're a great father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked at her, his heart swelling. "I'm just doing my best," he replied, though in that moment, he realized he had done more than his best. He had given his heart completely to his family, and that was all that mattered. Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're more than that. You're everything we need." Jack squeezed her hand, grateful for her words. They had come so far together, and he knew they still had a long way to go. But now, With Emily by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. As the weeks continued, Jack found himself more and more immersed in their world. The quiet moments he once found dull now felt like everything. He started to appreciate the small things, the sound of their child's laughter, the way Emily's eyes lit up when she looked at him, the way their lives had intertwined in ways he never could have planned. He was finally seeing the world with new eyes, and he couldn't help but wonder what else he had been missing before. One day, as they sat outside in the garden, the baby playing in the grass, Jack took a deep breath. The sun was shining, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. "I don't think I've ever been this happy," he said softly, his voice filled with a sincerity that took Emily by surprise. She looked at him, her smile gentle. "I know what you mean. I feel it too." Jack looked at their child, watching as they giggled in the grass. It was in these small, fleeting moments that Jack realized he had everything he had ever needed. He didn't need more success or more wealth. He didn't need anything outside of this family, this love, this life. Emily leaned into him, her warmth a comforting reminder that they had built something real. "You've done more than enough, Jack," she said, her voice full of love. Jack nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. This was what it meant to truly live. And as he watched Emily and their child, he knew that he had finally found his place in the world. It was here, with them, in this small, perfect life they had created together. And for the first time, Jack knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The days continued to slip by, each one seeming more connected to the next, and Jack found himself thinking more about the future than he ever had before. It wasn't the future of his business or his career, but the future of his family, the life he was building with Emily and their child. Everything he had worked so hard to achieve now seemed secondary to what was truly important. His son was growing, and Jack could see the tiny changes in him every day. His first smile, his first laugh, the way his tiny hands gripped Jack's finger as if he understood the bond between them already. Watching his child grow was the greatest gift Jack could ever imagine. There was so much he wanted to teach him, so much he wanted to share, and he knew he had to be there for every step. Emily, too, had changed in ways that Jack had never expected. Her strength, her grace, her unshakable love for their family, it all made Jack admire her even more. He had never known how much he could love someone until he saw the way Emily cared for their child, how she put their needs above everything else. She was the heart of their home, and Jack was in awe of her every day. The evenings, now that the baby had started to sleep more soundly through the night, were their time to connect. Jack would come home from work, the weight of the world still lingering on his shoulders, but Emily's smile and the warmth of their child always made it easier to leave the stress of the day behind. They would sit together, talking about anything and everything, sometimes about their dreams for the future, sometimes just about how their day had gone. Those quiet moments, those small exchanges, meant everything to Jack. They were the glue that held their world together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Jack found himself lost in thought. Emily, sensing his quiet mood, turned to him. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice soft and understanding. Jack took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next. You know, for us, for our family." Emily nodded, her hand resting gently on his. "What do you want the future to look like?" she asked. Jack looked at her, seeing the woman who had stood by him through every twist and turn, the woman who had helped him realize that there was so much more to life than just success. "I want it to be simple," he said. "I want it to be about us, about being together, raising our child, and making sure that we always have each other's backs, no matter what happens." Emily smiled, her eyes bright with affection. "I think that's a beautiful dream," she said. Jack smiled in return, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He had everything he needed right here with her, and he was starting to understand that the things he had once thought were so important didn't matter nearly as much as he had believed. The future was uncertain, but with Emily by his side, Jack knew they could face anything that came their way. The world outside seemed so loud, so full of distractions, but here, with his family, Jack found a peace he had never known. They didn't need the validation of others, the accolades, or the recognition. What mattered was their bond, their love, and the life they were creating together. The following months were a blur of milestones and moments. Their son started walking, and every step was a new adventure for the family. Emily and Jack took turns chasing after him, laughing at his clumsy movements, and marveling at how quickly he was growing. As much as Jack loved the excitement of seeing his son reach new milestones, he cherished the quiet moments even more. The times when they would all be together, sitting on the couch, reading a book, or simply enjoying each other's company. Those were the moments that defined their family, the moments that would last a lifetime. Jack had never imagined that he would find contentment in such simple things, but now, with Emily and their child by his side, he felt more fulfilled than he ever had before. He was no longer just a man focused on success. He was a father, a partner, and a man who had found his true purpose. As the months continued to pass, Jack realized that this was exactly what he had been searching for all along. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone. All he needed was his family, and that was enough. Jack had come to realize that every day with his family was a gift. His life had changed in ways he could never have predicted, and with each passing day, he found new ways to appreciate the small moments. As the baby grew older, Jack became more and more involved in the everyday rhythm of their lives. Emily had been the rock of their family, but Jack was beginning to understand how important it was for him to take an active role in shaping their future. The once distant idea of being a father was now a part of him, something he didn't just accept, but embraced with every fiber of his being. One evening, after a long day at work, Jack returned home to find Emily in the kitchen preparing dinner. Their son was sitting at the table, giggling as he played with his food. Jack smiled at the sight, his heart swelling with love. The house was warm, filled with the scent of freshly cooked food, and for the first time in a while, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. "How was your day?" Emily asked as she looked over her shoulder, her face lighting up as she saw him. Jack walked over to her, slipping his arms around her waist. "Better now that I'm home," he said, kissing the top of her head. Emily smiled, her eyes soft with affection. "I've missed you," she said. Jack's heart ached with the truth of her words. He hadn't realized how much he had been missing, not just physically but emotionally. It wasn't the busy meetings, the phone calls, or the deals that mattered. It was this life they had created together. "I've missed you too," Jack said, his voice sincere. "I've missed this, all of this." Emily set the spoon down and turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Jack thought for a moment before answering, his voice quiet, but full of emotion. "I mean, I've been so focused on building everything else, I forgot what really mattered. What really matters is right here." He gestured to the table where their child sat, his small hands playing with his food, and then to Emily. "This is what I've been working for. This is the real success." Emily's eyes softened, and she reached up to touch his cheek. "You've always had the heart for this, Jack. You just had to realize it." Jack smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle in his chest. He hadn't been wrong about his desire to build something, but he had never realized that the foundation he needed was already here, in the family they were building together. As dinner was served, the three of them sat around the table, talking and laughing, the sound of their joy filling the room. Jack realized that this was what he had always wanted, a life filled with love, not just success. There were no accolades, no awards, no titles that could compare to this. It was in the way their son looked up at him with trust in his eyes, in the way Emily smiled at him, the kind of smile that made him feel like the most important man in the world. As the night drew to a close and they tucked their son into bed, Jack found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The world outside had kept turning, but inside their home, they had built something real, something that was theirs. Jack had learned that true success was not about what you had, but who you had. And he was surrounded by the people who mattered most, his family. As he sat beside Emily, holding her hand, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. And that was all that really mattered. As the years went by, Jack's world became even more focused on the life he had built with Emily and their child. The world outside still moved at its fast pace, but inside their home, Jack felt a sense of calm and fulfillment that he had never experienced before. The once busy, hectic days of climbing the corporate ladder had been replaced with the everyday joy of raising a family. Jack no longer cared about the promotions, the big deals, or the recognition he once sought. His focus had shifted entirely to the people who mattered most. He watched his son grow, marveling at each new milestone. The first words, the first steps, the first time he looked up at Jack with those trusting eyes. Every moment with his child felt like a treasure, and Jack knew he would never take any of it for granted. Emily, too, had grown in her own way. She was still the strong, steady foundation of their family, but Jack could see how much joy she found in watching their son grow and develop. Her love for their family was palpable, and it made Jack appreciate her even more. There was a calmness in her presence, a quiet strength that kept their home grounded. They had come so far together, and Jack knew that without Emily, none of this would be possible. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, the baby now a toddler running around the yard, Jack looked at Emily and smiled. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked, his voice full of gratitude. Emily turned to him, her eyes soft with affection. "Every day," she said. "But I think what matters most is that we're here, together. We have everything we need." Jack nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. He realized that all the things he had once thought were so important, his career, his wealth, his status, paled in comparison to what they had built as a family. It wasn't just about having things, it was about having each other. Their family had become his greatest achievement, and he was more proud of it than anything he had ever done in his life. As they watched their son run through the grass, Jack felt a sense of joy and contentment that was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He had found his purpose, his real success, in the love of his family. He didn't need anything more. They had created something beautiful, something real, and Jack knew that no matter what the future held, they would always face it together. Emily had been his partner in every sense of the word, and Jack had learned more from her than he ever could have from any business deal. She had taught him that true happiness wasn't found in the pursuit of power or wealth, but in the simple moments, the shared experiences, and the unconditional love that they gave each other. As the evening faded into night and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Jack realized how blessed he was. He had everything he had ever wanted, not because of what he had achieved, but because of what he had found: love, family, and a sense of peace that no amount of money or success could ever provide. And with Emily by his side, he knew that whatever came next would be worth facing. Together, they had built something that was far more important than anything they could have ever imagined. It was theirs, and it was real. As the years went by, Jack and Emily found themselves in a rhythm that felt natural, something they had both worked hard to create together. Their child, now a young boy, had grown into someone who made every day a new adventure. Jack couldn't believe how quickly time had passed, how much they had accomplished, and how deeply they had changed in the process. His world, once full of meetings, spreadsheets, and negotiations, now revolved around playdates, school events, and family dinners. And somehow, he had never been happier. He had once thought that success was about building an empire, accumulating wealth, and achieving status. But now, as he watched his son run around the yard, laughing and carefree, he realized that success was about creating a life worth living, filled with love and connection. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch with Emily, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, he turned to her with a smile. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" he asked. Emily smiled, her eyes soft with affection. "Every day," she said. "But I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The past had shaped them, but it was the present that mattered now. They had built a family, a home, and a life that was real and meaningful. And that was enough. As their son grew older, Jack found himself taking more time to appreciate the little moments, the bedtime stories, the family vacations, the quiet mornings when they would all sit together and drink coffee before the day began. He had never imagined that these simple moments would become the most precious parts of his life. He had spent so much time chasing success, thinking that it was the key to happiness. But now, he understood that happiness wasn't something you could chase. It was something you had to create. And he had created it, right here with Emily and their child. One afternoon, as Jack sat in the park with his son, watching him play with other kids, he realized how much he had changed. He had once been so focused on his own ambitions, so driven by the need to succeed. But now, he found joy in the small things, watching his son learn new things, seeing the way Emily interacted with their child, and knowing that he was part of something bigger than himself. Emily joined him at the park, sitting beside him on the bench. "He's growing up so fast," she said, watching their son. Jack smiled, his heart full. "I know. It's hard to believe sometimes." They sat in silence for a few moments, just watching their son. The air was warm, the sounds of children laughing filled the space, and everything felt right. Jack realized how lucky he was. He had everything he needed. He had a family who loved him, a purpose beyond business, and a life that was full of meaning. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, still days when he wondered if he was doing enough. But those moments were fleeting. Because, at the end of the day, he had Emily. He had their son. He had love. And that was everything. As the years continued to pass, Jack found himself becoming less and less concerned with the outside world. The pressures of success, the expectations from his colleagues, and the relentless pursuit of more, all of it seemed distant now. He no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. All he needed to prove was that he was there for his family, that he was present in their lives, and that he would always choose them over everything else. And as he looked at Emily, the woman who had stood by him through everything, he knew that this was the life he had always wanted. The life they had built together, the life they had chosen, was everything. He didn't need more than this. He didn't need to chase anything else. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. As the years passed, the rhythm of Jack's life with Emily and their son became more comfortable, more familiar. The demands of the outside world still existed, but Jack had long stopped allowing them to define his happiness. He spent his days enjoying the simplicity of being present with his family, and every moment, no matter how small, was a reminder of how far he had come. His once insatiable need for success, for validation, had faded, replaced by a deep appreciation for the love and peace that filled their home. The world outside could keep turning, but Jack knew that he had everything he needed right here. Their son was growing up so quickly, and every milestone felt like a precious gift. Jack couldn't help but watch with awe as the boy became more independent, yet still clung to them for love and comfort. The way he would run to Emily with open arms, the way he would hold on to Jack's hand when crossing the street. These were the moments that meant everything to Jack. He realized that being a father wasn't about the grand gestures. It was about being there in those quiet, everyday moments. Emily, too, had evolved into the woman Jack had always admired, but now, in their shared life, he saw her strength in even greater depth. She had always been the steady anchor in their family, but as time passed, he noticed a new layer of confidence in her. The way she balanced everything, the way she supported him and their son, it was a constant source of inspiration for Jack. He had no idea how they had managed to build this beautiful life together, but he knew it was something they both had worked for, together. The way she cared for their family, the way she made everything seem so effortless, was something Jack could never have imagined before. In many ways, Emily was his greatest teacher. She had shown him what true happiness was, not in the form of riches, but in love and shared experience. Every day, Jack woke up beside her, grateful for the life they had made together. As their son reached his teenage years, Jack couldn't help but think about how much had changed. The struggles, the doubts, and the fears had all been part of their journey, but they had overcome them. They had built a foundation together that was strong and unshakable. He had learned that there was nothing more important than family, that there was nothing more fulfilling than being a part of something real. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Jack looked at Emily and their son, both of them laughing at something that had happened earlier that day. Jack couldn't help but smile at the sight. He had spent so much time chasing after success, but now he realized that this moment, was what it was all about. The quiet moments, the moments that didn't require any accolades or recognition, were the ones that meant the most. Their son, now a young man, looked at Jack with respect in his eyes, and Jack could see the love they had built had been passed down to the next generation. Emily caught Jack's eye, and the two of them shared a quiet understanding. They had done it. They had built a life together, not just for themselves, but for their son as well. Jack had once wondered if he was doing enough, if he was enough. But now, as he looked at his family, he realized that he was more than enough. They had everything they needed right here. The past, with all its struggles, had shaped them, but it was the present that mattered now. Jack didn't need anything more. He had everything he had ever wanted, and he couldn't be more grateful. As They finished dinner and cleared the table. Jack felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He didn't need to chase success anymore. Didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had created something that was real, something that would last. And with Emily by his side, and their son growing into the person they had hoped he would be, Jack knew they had everything they needed. They had each other. And that, Jack realized, was the greatest achievement of all.